hall monitor. Chapter 1. There is no one in Bikini Bottom like SpongeBob SquarePants when he is not at work whipping Krabby Patties or on an adventure with his best friend Patrick. SpongeBob can be found at Mrs. Puff's boarding school. Mrs. Puff's boarding school is where students learn the rules of the road. SpongeBob has taken Mrs. Puff's class 47 times. He knows the answer to every question in the classroom, but when it's time for the driving portion of the exam, SpongeBob always panics behind the wheel and ends up failing. When SpongeBob is on the road, it's best to steer clear or run for cover. One day at school, things seemed normal. SpongeBob sat in the back of the class taking notes while the other students slept. They were snoring almost louder than Mrs. Puff's lecture. Everyone wake up! Mrs. Puff called. It's time to pick this week's hall monitor. SpongeBob sat upright in his seat. He moved his desk out into the center aisle to make sure Mrs. Puff could see him. Being chosen as hall monitor was an honor SpongeBob wanted more than anything. With his eyes wide and hopeful, he wished hard for his name to be called. Mrs. Puff looked down at the list to ascertain to her clipboard and said, Let's see here. This week's hall monitor will be, what? No, he's done it already. Tina? No, she said to herself. Then Mrs. Puff gasped in honor and horror. At the bottom of the list was the name she feared the most. SpongeBob SquarePants. It's Jimmy. Jimmy's the hall monitor. Mrs. Puff explained. Jimmy, a green fish wearing shorts and a t-shirt, shook his head and said, Mrs. Puff, I done it already. Oh, said Mrs. Puff replied quickly, scanning the list again. Bill? No way, Mrs. Puff, answered Bill, a plump gray fish in the back. Mrs. Puff wasted no time. Tina, you're the hall monitor, she said. Hey, I've done it already. I. Hey, I've done it 3 times already, Tina declared, her fingers on her hips. Beth, Mrs. Puff said. Yes, Beth? She graduated, Jimmy told her. But this time SpongeBob had eagerly inched up the aisle. He could hardly contain his excitement. He knew what was coming, but Mrs. Puff was still trying to avoid calling the name of her son into a student. Henry, Bella, Sheldon, she called out in desperation, but it was no use. Mrs. Puff sighed deeply. All right, I guess I have no choice, she gloated. The hall monitor of the week is SpongeBob. Yahoo! SpongeBob yelled SpongeBob and so the victory dance began. SpongeBob raced around the classroom, bouncing off the walls and zigzagging around the desks. All the while he shouted, Hall monitor, I'm the hall monitor. SpongeBob Finally, SpongeBob calmed down, stood next to Mrs. Puff in the front of the class, and saw them. Hall monitor SpongeBob reporting for the doing math, he said in a very voice. Mrs. Puff began. But SpongeBob continued. I'm ready to. There's only my function in the hall. Yes, but Mrs. Puff said. I will patrol all week in the hall. SpongeBob shouted. All rules will be enforced in the hall. Okay, said annoyed Mrs. Puff. Just take the cap and belt. Excuse me. I can't expect that yet, ma'am. SpongeBob told her. First, I have to make my speech. Mrs. Puff said. You can't make this easy, can you? Classmates, SpongeBob began, who am I to deserve such a great honor? Why I be nothing without Mrs. Puff? Oh, give me a break, Mrs. Puff muttered under her breath. And to my public, SpongeBob continued. All I can say is, well, frankly, I'm touched. He whipped away a tear away. I want you to know that I represent you out there in the hall. I will carry all my duties, SpongeBob promised as he blinked. Crime on crime and punishment, punishment and crime in the hall. The student sighed and groaned. But SpongeBob wasn't done. That reminds me of an exam long speech written by the quiz homeowner all the time. He took a pause. Friends, students, to reveal the quiz name. Let me to use. The students covered their ears. 3 hours later, SpongeBob was again ready to wrap his speech. Finally, he said, in conclusion with a moment to spare, I will put on this uniform and enter my duties as hall monitor. SpongeBob had expected a round of applause, but by this time everyone had fallen asleep, including Mrs. Puff. Luckily, the bell rang. Huh? Oh, Mrs. Puff said as she stood up. All the students woke up in a and rushed out of the classroom. The paper relay ran for SpongeBob on the way out. SpongeBob, are you okay? Mrs. Puff asked. SpongeBob sighed. I overdid the speech again, didn't I? He asked his teacher. I'm afraid so, Mrs. Puff told him. Ah, tuna sauce, explained SpongeBob. I guess I won't be needing these. He handed the homeowner Captain Bell back to his teacher. Oh, no, hallelujah. Yeah, I didn't look inside at the uniform. SpongeBob was looking at the uniform so tightly that Mrs. Puff had to play it from his hands. SpongeBob's disappointment showed in his face as well, and his silently within the head. Mrs. Puff couldn't believe it, but she actually felt sorry for SpongeBob. Each time he'd been in the all monitor, he hadn't made it out of the door. SpongeBob? Yes, Mrs. Puff, replied SpongeBob. At least I can. At least you wear the uniform until tomorrow. She offered. Woohoo! Yelled SpongeBob. His head was back to its full size. Thanks, Mrs. Puff. SpongeBob sang to himself as he put on his home monitor uniform. Beep, boop, dee, 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 do, home, beep, dee, beep, the monitor, boop, toot, toot. Mrs. Puff sighed and shook her head as SpongeBob batted out of the classroom door. Stay tuned for chapter 2 coming up soon.